Welcome to Sparks of History. We are very pleased and honored to have with us today Rabbi Dr. Daniel Friedman, founder of the Center for Torah Values. Rabbi Friedman is the author of the popular book series, The Transformative Daf, and has served Jewish communities in the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada. Rabbi Friedman was appointed by the government of Canada to chair the National Holocaust Monument Council and is a specialist on the intersection of American Christianity and the U.S.-Israel relationships. Rabbi Friedman, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it very much.
Ari, it's an honor to be on your program. It's your service that you do for Klal Yisrael, for Medinat Yisrael, is unparalleled, and the distinguished guests that you have on the program are a real tribute to the fine work that you do. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. There has obviously been much publicity and discussion regarding the heads of American universities and colleges recently. Why do leaders of elite institutions lack moral clarity? How did we get to this state of affairs? And how did that lead to an acceptance of anti-Semitism on college campuses?
Yeah, well, I have to begin by saying we have an interesting situation in the elite universities in America. And I won't say it's all the elite universities where the leaders of the institutions lack moral clarity. I will tell you of a wonderful elite institution called Touro University, whose leader, Dr. Alan Kadish, has incredible moral clarity. I happen to be a professor at Touro, so I maybe am a little biased, but so I wouldn't say, though, that it is everyone. Unfortunately, what we have seen when we had the visit to Congress is that some of the major institutions that we would have expected better are not performing the way that we expected. How did it happen? Where did it come from? So it's not something that happened randomly. It's something that evolved over a number of decades in the academy as the academy took certain Weltanschauung of what is knowledge, what is the role of higher learning. And it evolved from a place where originally Western academic thought believed that, we were enlightened, we had the right way, we had gone through the evolution of history, and our level of knowledge was really superior to civilizations throughout the world. And then I would say over the last couple of decades of the 20th century, and certainly into the 21st century, there was a rethinking that maybe we don't have all the answers, and maybe the way that we are looking at the world is through the lens of Western ideas, and maybe we should start looking at it from when we're studying and conversing with other cultures. We should be thinking and seeing things through their lens as well. And this came with the advent of decolonization in the late 20th century to what has sometimes been termed a decolonization of knowledge. And that decolonization of knowledge, personally, I think is a bit of a misnomer and a misunderstanding. It kind of assumes that this Western, maybe Judeo-Christian approach was blind to the cultures around it. And I don't think that that was ever true. I mean, if you look at the canon of Western thought, I think that there's been a movement that has picked up the best of everyone as we've gone along the way, from biblical teachings to Greco-Roman teachings to, look in the Middle Ages when the height of Islamic philosophy, when we have Averroes. So it's not like the Western tradition has ever said, it's us and nobody else counts, nobody else matters. So I think that what we had in the academy was an amalgamation, a consolidation of the best of all. until we started wondering whether maybe that wasn't the case, and maybe we were self-conscious because we realized that from a power perspective, our nation states had gone in this great battle for Asia and Africa and colonized all of these countries. And so we in the academy, in the ivory tower, thought that maybe we're also guilty of that, and started to take that step back and say, the same way that we've pulled back and are no longer taking advantage of those weaker than us in terms of power and land and territory, then from a knowledge perspective as well, maybe we should reconsider who we are and the assumptions that we've made. One part of it, that's one element. The next element is a question of the role of the academy in producing, eliciting, generating, and encouraging the pursuit of knowledge and ideas. And so I think that what we saw in Congress, these leaders of these institutions sitting there answering the questions very strangely, unclearly and ambiguously, and we all thought to ourselves, how's that even possible? Why don't they know the answers to these basic questions? So for most people, these answers are black and white. For the leaders of these elite institutions that pride themselves on being the guardians of a space where one can discuss ideas and share different points of view and lenses of knowledge and information, if that's their role, then to be able to say that one view versus another view is superior or inferior from certain perspective, that almost feels like that they are deficient in fulfilling the mission that they've been assigned. But again, that point of view, to be able to say that that's what the academy is about, is relatively new. I mean, you look at the elite, some of these elite institutions in America, that they were originally very Christian institutions, built on Christian values as Christian seminaries, but not just for the purposes of training clergy people. It was for the purposes of taking knowledge and bringing knowledge to foster a society that's built on a certain moral foundation. And that's what the academies were about. And now to be able to be, at a point where it's no longer, this is our mission and this is our clarity and this is the message that we want to be able to instill in society. Now we've reached a stage where, since we don't know for certain that we have the right message, the only moral message, then we've become a forum for debating what the right moral message is and a plurality of moral messages. And to be able to silence any of those seems to certain leaders of these elite institutions to be a deficiency in their mission of producing this message after it's all been sorted.
But if we take an extreme example, so if one studies, let's say, a culture in Africa and they're cannibals, or if one studies a culture among maybe some Eskimos that take 70-year-old grandparents and leave them out in the tundra to die, no one would adapt and say, well, that's a different culture, so we have to understand why somebody is a cannibal, why somebody lets, a grandparent just die. I mean, does it go to that extreme? And on the other hand, we're not just seeing a plurality of opinions, we're seeing some, in certain areas, very, very strong opinions, that are not debatable. So that's two questions, that maybe there's different parts of the same question, I'm not sure.
Yeah, so in response to your first question, thank God we are still at a stage where there are limits. Does everybody abide those limits? Absolutely not. there are those in the ivory tower with tenure who will capitalize on the fact that they can say whatever they feel like and perhaps say that it is evidence-based because it is rooted in certain cultures. I don't know if anybody's arguing for cannibalism, but if you had to look at, well, I mean, I think probably something that's kind of already become mainstream in certain Western societies is to use the politically correct term assisted dying, right, which in most societies in Western thought was considered, assisted suicide until recently. And I think that it's something that's becoming more and more acceptable, but is essentially murder. And so that is one. I would say that when you start to get more borderline, you start to think about things like female genital mutilation, that from the most in the Western world would say this is absolutely barbaric. And then you have those who are saying, well, I want to be able to argue from a cultural perspective. Thank God we are still at a stage where United Nations international law says that it is barbaric and that it's forbidden, and that it is a line that we don't cross. So when you say that there are voices that seem to be strong in certain forums that would seem to be beyond the pale, part of the problem is that when we establish institutions and push the ideal of free speech, oftentimes, and I think this is what's happened in these elite institutions, perhaps with almost under the radar, without the leadership even recognizing that this has been happening, is that with the fomenting and encouraging of free speech, one can often reach a point where there are those who are arguing their points so loud and so vociferously and strongly that they silence the others. So in the name of free speech, we have people who are pushing an agenda while others just can't get word in edgeways. And so whether that's on the grounds of campus where people are campaigning in a certain way or putting up, barriers and walls and saying that this represents the situation in Israel-Palestine, or even in the classroom where we have had a concerted campaign from the Saudis and later the Qataris and others since 9/11. 9/11 was really the impetus when Saudi Arabia was this pariah. And so the Saudis came in with a lot of money into the academies. And, if any of your viewers think that I'm just talking conspiracy theories, Google New York Times, and you can, from, not yesterday, we're talking already a decade or two ago, that will tell you these stories are bona fide stories that established certain endowments in the universities to attract not only professors, but then students on scholarship with a certain mindset and a certain worldview that brought a way of thinking into the classroom. So while there were more Western, liberal, progressive-minded professors who were saying everything is all on an even par, they were then competing, or not even competing, because from their perspective, they're not going to speak up, with those who came in very strongly saying, this is the position, this is where certain thoughts have been ignored and need to be reinstated in the academy. And I know from personal experience, I've been in classes as I went through my political science degree. I'm a professor of political science, a PhD in political science, but I know that there were certain classes that, one had to kind of stay below the radar because one states certain opinions and knows that those are going against the current. You're swimming against the current. If you want to be able to get through this class, then you have to just, I wouldn't say toe the party line. You don't want to say anything that you believe to be incorrect, but not make any waves because this new agenda is being pushed. And at the same time that it's being pushed in the classroom, it's also being pushed in student unions as these students of a certain mind worldview are being brought in and told, be active in student life. And we have this shift that's happened where we now have leadership both at a faculty level and at a student level, and in some cases even in administration, that says that Israel is bad, Western civilization is bad, America is bad, and these are the flaws, and we need to be able to campaign against those flaws. And we have a real movement today in the academy against some of the things that we hold so dear and we assume to be not only just acceptable, but something, a point that we'd reached in Western thought and civilization.
So is the apparent alarming rise of anti-Semitism, perhaps on the college campuses, forget about the society at large, is that a function of this colonialism narrative? Or perhaps if you would take a poll among students at some of these universities, you'd be surprised and find out that it's not so anti-Israel, it's not anti-Semitic, it's just that those voices, as you said, are loud. It's like, I guess, the child that's screaming and kicking in the store is going to get their candy in the end of the day, because that's the only way to shut them up. So if you took a poll today at Columbia, Harvard, what would we see? Or perhaps they've done this already. I don't know.
So I think that there are different views on this. I'm optimistic. I still think that there's hope, and that there is a silent majority who understand the importance of America as an idea, and the importance of Israel, and that Israel has a right to defend itself, and that Israel is not going anywhere. And I think that I would like to think is true in certainly in America and Canada and Britain and Australia, and probably a good part of Europe as well today. Had you asked me a couple of decades ago in Europe, I might not have been so sure. I think that despite all of the terrible news that we hear and that we think that we're going in a poor direction, I'm not absolutely sure that that's the case. The outpouring of support for Israel on October 7th and beyond from many a country. I mean, just look at recently the defunding of UNRWA from country after country that Israel would never have expected to have had its back. I think speaks to a recognition by governments and by the people who have elected these governments of Israel's best attempts to be a moral army, a moral country, to be able to want to figure out a solution, to be able to want to accommodate, and to be doing its very best. Now, when it comes to the academy, I think that we have a combination of, yes, it's going in a certain direction. Yes, it is a growing phenomenon. Whether it is a majority, it's really hard to say. I think that most students are probably not politically active. Most students are not political science majors either. And, if they're sitting in a medicine class or an engineering class, they're probably not even engaged in the issue in one way or the other. So I think there's probably hope there. I'm not sure that Western civilization is over. I think that there's hope there. Having said that as well, I think it's also important to note when we talk about anti-Semitism and kind of blend it with anti-Zionism, the problem sometimes when we do take kind of that synonymous extreme position is that it comes back to bite us. So instead of allowing for a conversation that says that, well, what issues might you have with Zionism? Let's have an open conversation to be able to talk these things through. And instead, we automatically jump to, anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism without trying to figure it out. Sometimes it only makes the problem fester and even grow. And part of our problem, perhaps, is that maybe we're not allowing a conversation that does distinguish in such a way that we can point out anti-Semites and say, you have no basis for the arguments that you're making, therefore you are anti-Semitic. You're singling out Israel, you're not looking at anybody else, so that may be a basis for it. I mean, I'll tell you, my background is, like you mentioned, in church anti-Semitism, and one of the, I guess, first enlightening pieces that I realized when I was doing my research is that some of the mainline Protestant churches that were singling out Israel for opprobrium, it wasn't baseless. Their contention was, when I said, well, why Israel? Why aren't you looking at Syria? Why aren't you looking where things are egregious? Well, they said, well, Israel was the land that Jesus walked. Israel is the land of the Bible that we revere. Why would we be looking at Syria? I said, that's a good point. I understand that. And I think that we have to be willing to engage in a conversation as well, to only then be able to say, well, now you've crossed the line. And now, despite the fact that you have this affinity for Israel, we have to piece it apart and say, what exactly is bothering you? And if the project of Israel as a state for the Jews is what's bothering you, now we have a problem, right? So when we talk about, I think that anti-Semitism is rife in the mainline Protestant churches, in the universities, but we need to be able to remove the real anti-Semites from the ones who are dragging down people who are just not sure because they don't understand what Zionism is and they don't understand what the state of Israel is, and we're just allowing everybody to be pushed into the same group because we just put it all in one group. But if we would weed them out, I think that we would see that those anti-Semites truly only the minority, and the others are redeemable.
Just shifting a little bit, would an understanding of Torah, traditional Jewish values, change the prevailing situation? How so? And should Jews, and maybe particularly observant Jews, whatever that means, articulate Torah values to the general society?
So I think that the answer is yes. It wasn't always clear that the answer was yes, and I think that we're seeing that in ever increasing ways of the last couple of decades, that those who adhere to, let's call it, biblical views seem to be supportive of Israel. So whether that's in America, where it's obviously very strong, but beyond America, to Christian, let's say evangelical, but that were kind of boxes people in. But those with a biblical worldview seem to be supportive of the Jewish state. Now, people often jump to, well, that's because they believe in some sort of end times, rapture, whatever it is. I'm not sure that that's the case. That's not been my experience. In my experience and in my research, so there is an element of, well, look at the state of Israel and look at God's fulfillment of his promises that he promised here in this Bible. And, if he's fulfilled these promises in the Bible, then the Bible must be true. That's an element. Forget any end times issues, just the fact that the state of Israel exists. But even beyond that, there is a biblical way of thinking. And as I say, I think this was a Western Judeo-Christian way of thinking until recently, that understood that there is good and bad, that that we're not all just different points of view and different ways of looking at things and different narratives. There's a good and bad. And part of that good and bad says that there's a state of Israel, and the Jewish people were entitled to the state of Israel on whatever grounds. Obviously, people who are Bible believing know that the God promised it, and the Jews have a thousands-year-old history. But even beyond that, that it's even a question that, oh, maybe it's time to fold up the Jewish state. That is not rational. That's not something that we would think about any other country. It's not a standard that we would apply to any other country. There's a good narrative and a bad narrative, and once people understand and have a kind of moral persuasion and a strong sense of morality and what I believe in and who I am, what I stand for, I think that there comes a respect for a state of Israel and what Israel is doing. When one is of the view that, kind of anything goes and who am I to judge, then you get to a place where you can justify, God forbid, the October 7th massacres because, everybody has a different point of view. So this morality and this clarity, and thank God we've seen it in major Western countries, the US, the UK. This is not a party affiliation disparity. No. President Biden came out very strongly in support of Israel, right? So when we have this clarity of people who say, I'm Christian, I'm a religious person, then those Torah values, right, they're going to call it Judeo-Christian values, biblical values, we know that they are rooted in Torah. These are Torah values. And so when we have these Torah values, we have a clarity of purpose and a clarity of what's right and what's wrong without starting to, beat around the bush as to, what might be somebody else's view, even though it might not be my view and it might be just as excusable. Now, in terms of our responsibility to foment such ideas, absolutely. I mean, we already have in the Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu is told, write this Torah in 70 languages, write on those stones 70 languages so that the world can hear the message. Avraham Avinu is going throughout the region, teaching people about monotheism, teaching people about God, teaching people there's only one God, there's only one right way of leading the moral life. It's not just a choice of paganism, of polytheism. No, one God, and he has a message where there's no Haaretzism, but it's ethical morality, and there's a right and wrong. And that message that Moshe had, clearly in the Torah, give it to the nations, somehow we've lost along the way. Somehow, because we weren't in a position that we could give over the message. We lived in ghettos at best, and we weren't in a place to tell anybody what to do or what was wrong or what was right. And we kind of hoped that maybe by osmosis and a general exchange of ideas, if we were lucky, that we might be able to promote some of these biblical ideas. But it's certainly this is what we're here for. We're meant to be a light unto the nations. And to tell people what is wrong and what is right, and to tell people that there is a morality that is not subject to the whims of society or the trends of the day. There is a right, there is a wrong, and here's the clarity. We know. Look at the Rambam, who talks about. He says, there are always going to be minefields that we're walking into. He says, on the one hand, well, I think more people are familiar with Rambam's position that says that Islam is preferable to Christianity in terms of its clear commitment to monotheism, radical monotheism, only one God. Right? Whereas Christianity is not so clear. There's a Trinity. What does that mean? That's on the one hand, and I think most people know that. Many people are less familiar with the tshuva, the response of the Rambam, where he says that when it comes to teaching Torah, you can teach Torah Christians, but you can't teach Torah to Muslims. Why? Because Christians believe in the Hebrew Bible and the Jewish Bible, what they call the Old Testament. They believe that that's the word of God. Now, they've had some, misinterpretations of it, and we should probably set them right on that so that there's clarity. But they believe that they believe in the same Torah that we do. And so we should teach it to them, let them know what the right meaning is, and we will bring them to the right path of clear Torah values. Islam, on the other hand, believes that the Torah is a corruption of whatever original word of God there was, and the correct version is the Quran. And so whatever we do to try and teach the right word, there's always going to be this discrepancy where you're right, we're wrong, and vice versa. So Rambam says there's no point spreading those, we can talk general values, but in terms of actual Torah teachings on the inside, we have to be a little wary. Having said that, I think that there is common ground to have amongst generally religious people who have been brought along on this journey of the Western canon, Western thought, and understand that that Muslim philosophy, the likes of Averroes and others, were part of that canon, part of that journey, and that what we've seen, in recent decades, centuries, maybe is a deviation from what could have been. And so I think that there is an element as well within Muslim society, within the Muslim community, that certainly we should be reaching out to be able to strengthen the values that we all hold dear, and values of cooperation. Because if we say that, we just need to, separate and shun them, and we'll always have the conflict. What we want to be able to do is find the right partners. And, who would have ever thought 10 years ago that, Saudi Arabia would even be on the table for normalization, for diplomacy, for working together? Nobody is beyond the pale. Nobody is beyond hope. And the more that we have conversations and recognize that we don't all have to think that the other person's also right, but we can respect, I'm right, think you're wrong, and I understand if you think you're right, I'm wrong, as long as we can somehow find a way forward so that we are not involved in physical violence.
That's a lot of food to think about, and it sounds like we all have a lot of work to be done. And on that note, again, Rabbi Dr. Friedman, thank you so much for your thoughts, your inspiration, and it's good to hear some optimism during these days. Thank you so much again. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you for having me, and please God, may we hope and pray for optimism that very soon we should see peace with all of our soldiers home, with the hostages home, and only blessings for the state of Israel, for the Jewish people, for the region, for the entire world, and peace in the world for the future.
Amen. Thank you very much. Thank you.